This Special Action Newsjax presentation contains scenes from the September 11th attacks that some viewers may find disturbing. September 11th, 2001. A day that will never be forgotten.
I just couldn't see the world the same way anymore after that.
A day that our way of life was attacked.
There would be some times where she would wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and just start screaming, "The building's burning, the building's burning."
A day that we lost mothers and daughters, fathers and sons.
I'll never forget those sacrifices that those individuals made.
Heroes who gave it all to protect our nation.
My goodness, in the last 20 years, thousands of other Americans have answered the call. They've sacrificed blood, limbs, their very lives.
This is a Special Action Newsjax presentation. 9/11, 20 years later.
20 years ago, 4 flights took off from airports in Boston, Newark, and Washington, D.C. They never reached their intended destinations.
It didn't take long to understand that America was under attack. What didn't come quickly, grappling with the loss of nearly 3,000 innocent souls.
I'm Tanika Hughes. We believe that we can't fully tell the story about what happened without revisiting imagery that some may find difficult to watch.
I'm John Bachman. Part of the message of 9/11 is to never forget, to honor those victims and heroes. Here's how that day played out 20 years ago.
Within the span of 43 minutes, 4 passenger jets took off from airports on the East Coast, headed to Los Angeles and San Francisco. On board the 4 planes, 213 passengers, 33 crew members, and 14 Al-Qaeda terrorists. Not long after takeoff, the planes are hijacked. 4 minutes later, the first plane collides with the North Tower of the World Trade Center, a symbol of American capitalism and one of the tallest buildings on the planet. While the world raced to figure out what was happening, the next plane impacts the South Tower. It was immediately clear this was deliberate. First responders rushed to Lower Manhattan, fighting against the clock to get as many people out of the fiery buildings. Just before 10 a.m., the third hijacked jet slams into the Pentagon, the headquarters for the U.S. military's Department of Defense. 125 people inside lost their lives. At 9:59, the South Tower falls. More than 800 people and first responders died in the collapse. A few minutes after 10 o'clock, the passengers of Flight 93 stormed the cockpit, attempting to retake the plane. The flight is just 20 minutes away from Washington, D.C., with likely targets of the White House or the Capitol building. Their heroic intervention prevents a 4th attack, but ends with the plane plummeting into a field outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Just before 10:30, the North Tower comes down. More than 1,600 lives lost in that collapse. In the hours that followed, brave men and women across our country fought against the chaos. That included rescuers searching the rubble for survivors, healthcare workers treating the injured, political leaders mobilizing resources, and communities banding together to overcome any crisis that came our way. It was a difficult time for America, but one of few times in history where our country was united to face the hardships together.
There are so many heroes that emerged on 9/11, including the passengers of Flight 93. I spoke with the father of Todd Beamer about how his faith guided his son's life and led to the actions that saved countless lives. There are many words that could be used to describe Todd Beamer: husband, father, son, and friend. His father and former Jacksonville Beach resident David Beamer also calls him a hero and faithful servant.
He was a great guy growing up as a son, and he became a excellent husband, father, provider, and at the end of the day, protector for his family.
Todd Beamer was one of 33 innocent passengers on United Airlines Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco on September 11, 2001. Todd was also one of the people who staged a counterattack against the 4 terrorists who hijacked the plane. Notes from calls made by passengers and crew after the hijacking began reveal that many were made aware of the other 3 hijacked planes that hit the World Trade Center towers and the Pentagon.
They knew the hijackers were lying. They weren't going back to Newark. It wasn't a normal hijacking. They realized they were guided missile number 4.
In one of the calls, Todd managed to get connected to GTE Airphone supervisor Lisa Jefferson. She spoke to CBS News about their conversation, including Todd's 2 requests: to tell his wife and family that he loved them, and
he said, "Lisa, would you recite the Lord's Prayer with me?" And I knew that he knew at that time that it wasn't much left for him to do.
Todd had assurance about his faith and ultimate destiny. When he got up that morning, he didn't expect to meet God at around 10 a.m.
David says the passengers and crew on Flight 93 were heroes who gave their lives to protect our country.
We haven't had any more 9/11s on our homeland. There are reasons for that. Thousands of Americans have answered the call and served to prevent that from happening. And we have been blessed. We have been blessed.
Help was badly needed for search and rescue at Ground Zero, and firefighters from across the country answered that call. One local firefighter spoke with Action News Jack's Danny Bazzini about how his experience in New York changed his life forever.
It's hard for me to say it, but it's so true. I could smell death in the air.
Charles Moreland is a firefighter. When he hears a call for help, he answers it.
Lauren Mock, who's the chief of operations, and he said, hey, would you like to go to 9/11, to go to the World Trade Center and to go to the Pentagon?
In 2001, Moreland was in his early 20s. He had been training for this moment at Station 7 since he was 18, specializing in hazardous material incidents. Nothing could have prepared him for what he saw in New York.
It didn't look real to me, and that was emotional and tough. Immediately after being in the hot zone, we wasn't there long, they found another body, and everything came to a halt.
When you saw everyone just stop, what was going through your mind, experiencing that firsthand?
It made you just realize how fragile life is.
The first responders and volunteers who survived that dark day continue to face hardship today in the form of health problems. The CDC says more than 43,000 people are reported to have a 9/11 related health issue. Moreland would become Battalion Chief of Rescue for JFRD and now works in the mayor's office as the Director of Community and International Affairs. But there is not a day that goes by that he doesn't think about his experience 20 years ago.
Never forget those sacrifices that those individuals made to make it better 20 years later. It's because of them we're better 20 years later. They made the ultimate sacrifice, and we never want to forget that.
Many of the stories of 9/11 involve brushes with death that changed families forever.
And that includes one mother's harrowing escape from the Pentagon.
Loving, caring, and fierce.
Eric Olea says his mom, Dalice, known as Day, was small in stature, but her heart was expansive. She had a deep love for family that extended to her coworkers. Dalice spent decades in civil service in Washington, D.C., and was working inside the Pentagon on September 11, 2001. She was one of several people who detailed their experience in a book called Then Came the Fire. Her interview inspired the title. In the book, Dalice said she called her husband to ask if he had seen the attack on the World Trade Center in New York. She told the author, "After I hang up, I felt a big, like an earthquake, and then came the fire." It was American Airlines Flight 77 crashing into the Pentagon, knocking Dalice and her colleagues into darkness, piercing heat, blinding smoke and flames. She went on to describe the chaotic scene. Somebody cannot see, someone was burning and they were hurt. Everybody was trying to find a way out.
At first they were trying to go through the fire doors. All the fire doors were hot, and By that time, all the smoke and soot had set in. So she had basically given up and told Michael Petrovich, who is her Army specialist, that, just tell my family that I tried and I couldn't make it. And from then, Michael says, no, Day, I'm not leaving you behind. I want you to get on my back and we're gonna crawl out of here together.
She was part of a group that managed to help each other crawl to a window and jump to escape. Dalice broke her leg in the fall.
Being small as she was, because she was only 4'11", it showed me how really strong she could be when she needed to be.
The wife and mother survived the unthinkable.
Physically, she had to live with a titanium leg. Emotionally, it was very, very tough. There would be some times where she would wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and just start screaming, the building's burning, the building's burning. And then my dad would have to calm her down.
PTSD.
Right.
While the life-changing experience stayed with Dalice, she returned to work and was also awarded the Defense of Freedom Medal. Until her death 2 years ago, Eric said his mother was determined to not let what happened take the joy out of her life. Joy that centered around her family, from traveling to spending time with her grandchildren.
She loved her grandchildren very much. She supported everything each of them did.
Now, 20 years after the attack that changed our country and so many lives, Eric says he hopes everyone will take time to reflect on September 11th. He will continue to honor his mother, just as she would have wanted, with love, as a family.
Still to come on 9/11, 20 years later.
And the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
Americans hear the call to serve and deliver justice for the victims.
Something about that stuck in my head and said, I'm not going to sit by and allow this to go down.
How a local veteran is overcoming trauma and looking back at the moments that defined his life. You're watching a Special Action Newsjax presentation, 9/11, 20 years later.
After 9/11, many Americans heeded the call to serve and joined our armed forces.
Action News Jack's Danny Bazzini spoke with a local veteran about how that tragic day changed the rest of his life.
It just was luck of the draw. They didn't pick her plane.
John Tappan remembers September 11th, 2001 vividly, and the fear he felt for his mother. He was just starting his junior year of high school in New Hampshire. His entire school was on lockdown, but all he could think of was his mom.
I remember specifically seeing that second plane hitting the World Trade Center and thinking of my mother who flew out of Logan that day. I couldn't convey how terrified I was.
In that classroom, Tappan felt hopeless. No way to call her, let alone protect her. Thankfully, her plane was safe, held on the tarmac during the chaos. But those long hours of uncertainty and the tragic scenes of destruction solidified it. Tappan would join the military when he was old enough.
Something about that stuck in my head and said, I'm not going to sit by and allow this to go down.
He served in the U.S. Navy as a flight engineer from 2006 to 2011.
We worked on P-3s and basically doing reconnaissance, sub-hunting, things like that.
Tappan felt proud, experienced an unbreakable bond with his fellow sailors. But nothing would be the same after his deployment in 2008 to Iraq and Afghanistan.
I thought when I joined that I was going to do 20 years, for sure. I mean, all in. I think what really took it back for me was deployment. It did something to me, and I just couldn't see the world the same way anymore after that.
It took a toll on Tappan and was enough that he chose to leave the service 2 years later.
It takes something out of you.
It took him 10 years to acknowledge that. He just recently started feeling like himself again.
Down, come on.
Helping him cope, his new best friend, Henry, a service dog given to him through Canines for Warriors.
He brings the best out of me.
He is no longer ashamed or embarrassed asking for help. But September 11th, 2001 will forever be etched in his heart.
There were people who gave themselves up for the way that you and I live on a day-to-day basis. There is nothing more than you have to pay homage. You have to be humble. You have to be humbled by the sacrifices.
Working for the TSA isn't easy. Travelers aren't always happy going through security screenings, yet those workers understand why their jobs are so vital. Action News Jack's Ben Ryan shows us what it means to them and how their efforts have protected passengers for nearly 2 decades.
When you catch a flight in America, going through TSA is just part of the process.
Step on it. Everything out of your pockets?
Check-ins and screenings are part of the deal in 2021, but things were different 20 years ago.
I was working at the port when 9/11 happened, and I had that horror in front of my eyes of the war in Bosnia and what we went through, and it was just, I had to do something.
Rada Azizi is from Bosnia, and like many Americans, remembers one of the darkest days in U.S. history. As a Bosnian refugee turned U.S. citizen, she found a home in America and the TSA.
Just getting my citizenship, being trusted, so much information, so much sensitive security information, getting the security clearance, that was amazing.
Routinely, TSA officers like Azizi confiscate items like guns, tasers, hammers, and machetes.
If we weren't here to guard the front door to these airports, someone would walk in the door, I promise you.
Federal Security Director Brian Cahill says a little more than 50% of all air travelers receive a form of expedited screening. He's in charge of overseeing TSA operations at 7 airports, including the supervision of officers like Michael Perry.
Did you leave a laptop in your bag?
Though only with TSA for now 2 years, Perry does it all, screening passengers, checking bags, and making sure the travel experience goes smoothly.
People that have never met me and people that I've never met, okay, they traveled safely because I did it right.
Doing it right is something he strives for every single day. He takes his mission seriously and traveled more than 1,800 miles in 46 hours in honor of the lives lost on 9/11. Last month, he visited the Flight 93 Memorial in Pennsylvania. 2 co-workers brought together by a tragic event, now with the same mission to keep airline passengers safe.
When I go home and I know all the planes landed safely and that everyone is safe, it's the biggest accomplishment.
Next, on September 11th, 20 years later,
one by one, all of our pagers started to go off.
we all remember where we were that sad day,
Today, we've had a national tragedy.
including a former reporter who was with President Bush.
And then moments later, had to deliver a live broadcast. I was fighting back tears.
How her experience changed her perspective on what truly makes our country special. You're watching a Special Action News Jax presentation, 9/11, 20 years later.
With the exception of the very young or those who weren't even born yet, every American remembers where they were on 9/11.
Yeah, and a Jacksonville woman had an especially unique experience. As Action News Jax Ben Becker reports, she was there when President Bush got the news.
Have you ever cried over that day?
Oh, every 9/11.
Maria Chrisovergis is a St. Johns County mother of 2. But in 2001, pictured here, she was an education reporter for the CBS affiliate in Fort Myers. On September 11th, she was inside a Sarasota classroom. Booker Elementary had a special guest that morning, President George W. Bush. He was there promoting his No Child Left Behind initiative to help disadvantaged students. Chrisovergis was watching a live feed from another classroom when suddenly Bush's chief of staff walked up and whispered in the president's ear.
I vividly remember the look on his face. And I remember telling my photographer, I think something happened to his parents. Like you could tell something was wrong.
Something was wrong. What followed became the worst terrorist attack in U.S. history.
One by one, all of our pagers started to go off. And my news director sent me a text on my pager that said, it appears that America is under attack. You're with the president. Keep us posted.
Soon after, the president addressed the nation from the school.
Today, we've had a national tragedy.
Chrisovergis says while journalists should never get too personally involved with any story they cover, This was different.
Moments later, had to deliver a live broadcast. I was fighting back tears. I was 25 years old. Now I'm a mom, and I fear for the world that we are living in.
Now, this mother who owns her own public relations firm instills American pride in her children.
The biggest takeaway that I always share with my kids is just that American spirit. We are a free country, and there are people who want to take that away from us.
And as for that fateful day at a Sarasota school 20 years ago, Crystal Vergas never forgets the history lesson.
I force myself to watch the coverage, and when I see the ringing of the bells, every time they call a name of somebody who died in the World Trade Center, I'll just sit on my couch and bawl. I just wish we could all figure this out. We're all sharing one world together. It doesn't have to be this difficult. It doesn't have to be this kind of hate.
Thank you for joining us as we look back on a day that changed our country.
We hope that remembering how we all felt unites us and reminds us to treat each other as fellow Americans.
This has been a special Action Newsjax presentation, 9/11, 20 years later.